Teacher throws snake at black student. When she saw who his father was, she begged for forgiveness. A powerful story about prejudice, power, and justice, where an arrogant teacher learns the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. When her bias leads her to humiliate a black student using a snake, she never imagined that this decision would change her life forever upon discovering the true identity of the boy's father. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to never miss an amazing story like this one. Comment below which city you're watching from. Let's see where our warriors are from. Buckle up, because this story will leave you breathless. On a seemingly ordinary morning at Evergreen Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in Boston, Massachusetts, Ms. Victoria Hawthorne adjusted her impeccable blazer while observing the arriving students with disdain. Her gaze lingered on Jamal, a 12-year-old black boy who always arrived in a modest car and wore a second-hand uniform. What no one knew was that this day would change everything. Victoria, known for her excessive rigor and acidic comments, had prepared something special for her science class. In the terrarium next to her desk, a young ball python moved slowly, part of an educational demonstration she had meticulously planned. Jamal sat in the front row, as he always did, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Victoria smiled slyly, anticipating the moment. The boy had a phobia of snakes, information she had accidentally discovered while snooping through his school records. The clock struck 8:45 a.m. when the first screams echoed through the third-floor corridor. No one imagined that those same corridors, 2 hours later, would witness the arrival of a man who would make Victoria question every decision she had made that morning. The snake slithered across the classroom floor, while cell phone cameras recorded the moment. Jamal, paralyzed with fear, couldn't move. Victoria observed with a disguised smile, whispering to herself, "Let's see if he learns his place now." Little did she know that at that very moment, a black Rolls-Royce was parking in front of the school, and its driver was receiving a message that would change the course of this story forever. In the back seat of the car, a man in an Italian suit was ending an important call. His usually serene face hardened as he heard the screams coming from his driver's cell phone. "Sir," said the driver, "it's Jamal." The man adjusted his silk tie, his gold rings reflecting the sunlight. On his wrist, a watch that cost more than Victoria's annual salary gleamed discreetly. "Park in front," he ordered, his calm voice carrying a weight that would make anyone tremble. Inside the classroom, chaos reigned. Students, mixing nervous laughter and expressions of horror, formed a circle around Jamal. Victoria feigned concern, but her satisfaction was evident in the upturned corners of her lips. "Calm down, Jamal. It's just a practical demonstration about reptiles," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The terror in the boy's eyes increased with each passing second as the snake approached. Some students began live streaming on social media, unaware that those images would soon go viral for reasons no one could predict. Victoria, realizing she might have gone too far, began to feel the first signs of worry. But it was too late. The classroom door burst open and a figure stepped in, his presence immediately commanding attention. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft hiss of the snake and Jamal's rapid breathing. Evergreen Academy wasn't just a school. It was a symbol of status in the heart of Boston's elite Beacon Hill neighborhood. Its red brick walls and meticulously manicured gardens hid a social hierarchy as rigid as its rules. Victoria Hawthorne, 45, had been teaching science for 2 decades, building a reputation based more on fear than respect. The daughter of a declining old money family, Victoria compensated for her own insecurities through the power she wielded over her students. Her office was a sanctuary of framed diplomas and Educator of the Year awards, achievements she used as a shield to justify her controversial methods. Jamal Washington, on the other hand, was unlike any student who had ever set foot in that institution. At 12, he had eyes that carried wisdom beyond his years. His mother, Tanya, worked night shifts as a nurse to supplement their income. unaware of the luxurious life her ex-husband had built after their separation. The boy had inherited from his father not only sharp intelligence, but also silent dignity. Even when Victoria provoked him with veiled comments about affirmative action and meritocracy, Jamal remained serene, a characteristic that only increased the teacher's irritation. The guidance counselor, Sarah Rodriguez, 38, had long observed Victoria's behavior with growing concern. Her attempts to alert the administration always ran into the influence Victoria maintained over the old board of directors. "She has unconventional methods, but the results are unquestionable," was the standard response she received. What no one at Evergreen Academy knew was that Jamal's father, Marcus Washington, 45, wasn't just another successful businessman. As one of the country's leading tech investors and philanthropists, he kept his identity protected from the media, preferring the anonymity that allowed him to observe the world without social masks. The decision to enroll Jamal in a traditional school without using his influence was calculated. Marcus believed his son needed to understand all facets of society, including its prejudices. But there were limits, and Victoria was about to discover them. In the school corridors, students were divided between those who blindly followed Victoria's guidelines and a small group that secretly rooted for Jamal. Emma Chen, 12, daughter of Chinese immigrants, was one of the few who dared to show friendship to the boy, even under the teacher's disapproving gaze. The janitor, Mr. Thompson, 60, a silent witness to 2 decades of stories in those corridors, was the only one who knew Marcus's true identity. His tired eyes had seen the businessman drop Jamal off at school a few times on days when Tanya was overwhelmed at the hospital. The school, with its state-of-the-art classrooms and centuries-old traditions, was a microcosm of American society. Social divisions, though disguised under identical uniforms and polite smiles, were as real as the high walls surrounding the campus. That morning, as the snake became an instrument of humiliation, each of these characters occupied their place in the social theater that was about to crumble. The power Victoria believed she had was about to prove as illusory as her sense of superiority. In the teacher's lounge, a clear division was forming. Some colleagues who had silently witnessed Victoria's discriminatory behavior for years finally found the courage to speak up. Others, beneficiaries of the system she represented, tried to minimize the incident. "She's always been like this," whispered Ms. Patel, the history teacher, to Sarah. "Remember last year's case with that student in a wheelchair? We all pretended not to see." Sarah, the guidance counselor, faced her own moral dilemma. In her drawer was a folder full of filed complaints against Victoria, reports she should have forwarded to the ombudsman but were suppressed by pressure from the old administration. As the snake incident unfolded, each of these individuals would be forced to confront their own biases, complicities, and the true meaning of education and justice. The foundations of Evergreen Academy were about to be shaken, and with them the comfortable illusions of the privileged world it represented. The chaos in the classroom reached its peak when the snake, startled by the screams, began to move more quickly towards Jamal. The boy, still paralyzed, had silent tears streaming down his face, while Victoria maintained her poorly disguised smile of satisfaction. "Miss Hawthorne, please take the snake away," Emma shouted, being the only one trying to intervene. Victoria silenced her with a cutting look. "This is a practical lesson on dealing with stress situations," Victoria declared, her voice laden with false concern. "Jamal needs to learn to face his fears. He won't always have someone to protect him." Jamal's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from his father. "Son, I'm seeing the live video. Don't move, I'm coming." But the boy was too terrified to even reach for the device. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Marcus Washington stepped out of his Rolls-Royce, adjusting his Tom Ford suit. His imposing presence made the school security guards instinctively straighten up. Mr. Thompson, recognizing him, quickly opened the gates. Back in the classroom, the situation was worsening. The snake had coiled near Jamal's feet, who was now breathing with difficulty. Victoria, realizing she might have gone too far, began to feel the first signs of worry. "I think that's enough demonstration," said Sarah Rodriguez, the guidance counselor, bursting into the room after being alerted by a student. But Victoria, intoxicated by her moment of power, ignored her. "Don't interfere, Sarah. This is my class, my rules," Victoria responded dryly. "Besides, certain people need to learn they can't expect special treatment just because—" Her sentence was interrupted by the sound of the door opening again. Marcus Washington entered the room, his gaze quickly scanning the scene before him. The silence that followed was deafening. "Dad!" Jamal whispered, his voice trembling. Victoria froze. Her face paled as she recognized the man whose photo had been on the cover of the latest Fortune magazine. The same man she had seen weeks earlier in a report about the 10 most influential businessmen in the country. "Would someone please remove this animal from the room?" Marcus spoke calmly, and everyone realized he wasn't just referring to the snake. Mr. Thompson, who had followed Marcus, quickly called the animal control officer who was on standby at the school. Victoria began to stammer explanations. "Mr. Washington, I didn't know. It was just an educational demonstration." "Educational?" Marcus interrupted, his voice controlled but sharp. "Recording and humiliating a student, using an animal to terrorize a child, is that what you call education?" The room was in complete silence now. Students who seconds before were filming with their cell phones now lowered them slowly, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Does your pedagogical method include traumatizing children, or is this reserved only for black students?" Marcus continued, each word calculated to expose the true nature of Victoria's actions. Victoria, who moments before had carried herself as queen of her domain, now seemed to shrink under Marcus's penetrating gaze. Her hands trembled as she tried to maintain composure. "Mr. Washington, I can explain—" "There's nothing to explain," he cut her off again. "The videos your students so helpfully shared on social media have already explained everything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm taking my son home. As for your future at this institution, well, that will be discussed in another sphere." Marcus approached Jamal, who finally managed to move after the snake was removed. The businessman gently placed his hand on his son's shoulder, a protective gesture that spoke louder than words. As father and son left the room, Victoria realized her world was about to crumble. The power she had cherished so much had become her own trap. Sarah Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "Miss Hawthorne, I think it's best if you leave the premises immediately. The board will be in touch regarding next steps." As Victoria stumbled out of the classroom, the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. Students whispered among themselves, some looking shocked, others vindicated. Emma approached Jamal and his father at the door. "I'm so sorry, Jamal. I should have done more." Marcus smiled at her kindly. "You stood up when others didn't. That's what matters." As they walked down the hallway, the once imposing corridors of Evergreen Academy seemed to echo with the promise of change. The incident with the snake had not just exposed one teacher's prejudice. It had cracked open the veneer of respectability that had long hidden systemic issues within the school and beyond. As news of the incident spread through the school like wildfire, different parallel dramas began to unfold. Emma, Jamal's friend, was frantically sending messages to her student rights group, documenting everything that had happened. Her mother was a civil rights attorney, and she knew exactly how this material could be useful. In the teachers' lounge, a clear division was forming. Some colleagues who had silently witnessed Victoria's discriminatory behavior for years finally found the courage to speak up. Others, beneficiaries of the system she represented, tried to minimize the incident. "She's always been like this," whispered Miss Patel, the history teacher, to Sarah. "Remember last year's case with that student in a wheelchair? We all pretended not to see." Sarah, the guidance counselor, faced her own moral dilemma. In her drawer was a folder full of filed complaints against Victoria, reports she should have forwarded to the Ombudsman, but were suppressed by pressure from the old administration. In the courtyard, Mr. Thompson, the janitor, was discreetly talking to his daughter, who worked as an investigative journalist. "Honey, that anonymous tip you received last month about discrimination in elite schools, I think I just witnessed the proof you needed." Meanwhile, in the principal's office, the school board was having an emergency meeting. The video of the incident had already surpassed 1 million views, and the hashtags racist teacher and just justice for Jamal were dominating social media trends. "Marcus Washington isn't just another rich parent," explained the financial director, nervously wiping his forehead. "He's the main investor in the largest educational group in the country. If he wants to, he can buy this school before dinner." In the parking lot, Victoria remained in her car, alternating between crying fits and desperate attempts to contact her influential acquaintances. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating with notifications. Her former victims, encouraged by the incident, were beginning to share their own stories on social media. Emma was organizing a silent protest with other students. They planned to arrive the next day, wearing black, with white armbands, a symbol of solidarity with Jamal and all who had suffered at Victoria's hands. In the computer lab, the technology teacher was discreetly backing up all emails exchanged between Victoria and the old administration. He had always known this day would come, and now his precautions would prove valuable. At her home, Sarah was drafting her confession letter, detailing years of omission and silent complicity. "I can't change the past," she wrote, "but I can ensure the truth comes out now." The case was beginning to attract national attention. Journalists surrounded the school gates, while education experts were called to comment on the incident on major news networks. The Department of Education was already announcing an official investigation, and the district attorney's office signaled interest in the case. What started as another act of discrimination in a classroom was about to expose a much larger system of institutionalized prejudice. Tanya Washington, Jamal's mother, was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had just finished a night shift at the hospital when the news reached her. Now, sitting in Marcus's living room for the first time in years, she struggled to process everything. "I always knew Jamal faced challenges at school," she said, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "But how could they let this happen?" Marcus, his usual composure slightly cracked, replied, "We're going to fix this, Tanya. Not just for Jamal, but for every child who's ever felt out of place in a system that should nurture them." As they spoke, Marcus's phone buzzed continuously. CEOs, politicians, and civil rights leaders were all reaching out, sensing the potential for significant change that this incident could spark. In a small apartment across town, Victoria sat alone, the reality of her actions finally sinking in. Her phone, once her connection to power and influence, now lay silent. She realized that her demonstration of power hadn't just destroyed her career, it had initiated a revolution in the educational system she thought she controlled. The next few days would prove crucial, not just for Jamal and his family, but for Evergreen Academy and potentially the entire educational landscape of the country. The following morning, Evergreen Academy awoke to a sea of black. Students, many accompanied by their parents, arrived wearing black clothing with white armbands, a silent but powerful protest organized by Emma and her friends. The school grounds were surrounded by news vans and reporters, all clamoring for a statement. Inside the school's main conference room, an emergency meeting was underway. The board of directors, legal counsel, and key administrative staff sat around a large oak table, tension palpable in the air. Principal Harriet Winters, a woman in her 60s who had led the school for over 2 decades, looked visibly shaken. "Gentlemen, ladies, we are facing an unprecedented crisis," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "The reputation we've built over a century is at stake." As they debated their next steps, a knock on the door silenced the room. Marcus Washington entered, followed by Tanya and Jamal. The board members straightened in their chairs, acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. Marcus spoke first, his voice calm but authoritative. I believe we all know why we're here. What happened yesterday wasn't just an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a much deeper problem. Tanya, still in her nurse's scrubs from her night shift, added, Our son has been facing microaggressions and subtle discrimination for years. We trusted you with his education and safety. You failed him, and who knows how many others. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. The legal counsel cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Washington, we assure you that Ms. Hawthorne's actions do not reflect the values of Evergreen Academy. We are prepared to offer— Offer what? Jamal interrupted, surprising everyone. It was the first time he had spoken since entering the room. Money? A special program? That's not why we're here. All eyes turned to the young boy, who suddenly seemed older than his years. Encouraged by his parents' supportive nods, Jamal continued, What happened to me was wrong, but it's not just about me. It's about every student who's ever felt out of place here, who's been made to feel less than because of their race, background, or anything else. A heavy silence fell over the room. Principal Winters, visibly moved, spoke up. Jamal, you're absolutely right. We've failed you, and we've failed as educators. But what do you propose we do? Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. We have an opportunity here, not just to make amends, but to lead by example. Evergreen Academy can become a model for inclusive education, a place where diversity is truly celebrated, not just tolerated. He laid out a comprehensive plan. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff and faculty, a review and overhaul of the curriculum to include more diverse perspectives, the establishment of a student-led diversity council, and a scholarship program to increase accessibility for underprivileged students. The board members listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. The financial director spoke up. Mr. Washington, while these are admirable goals, the costs involved will be covered, Marcus interjected. My foundation is prepared to fund this initiative fully. But make no mistake, this isn't a donation. It's an investment in the future of education. Tanya, who had been quietly observing, added her perspective. As a healthcare worker, I've seen how systemic biases can literally be a matter of life and death. Education is no different. We're shaping the future leaders of this country. We owe it to them to do better. As the discussion continued, a commotion could be heard outside. Sarah Rodriguez, the guidance counselor, burst into the room, looking flustered. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. She turned on the large screen in the conference room. A live news broadcast showed Victoria Hawthorne outside the school gates, surrounded by reporters. To everyone's shock, she was making a public statement. What I did was inexcusable, Victoria said, her voice shaking. I've spent the night reflecting on my actions, not just yesterday, but throughout my career. I've come to realize that I've been part of a system that perpetuates bias and discrimination. I'm here to take full responsibility and to offer my complete cooperation in any investigation or reform efforts. The room fell silent as they watched. Jamal, his eyes wide, turned to his parents. She's apologizing, he said, a mix of emotions in his voice. Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder. This is your moment, Jamal. What do you want to do? Jamal took a deep breath, looking around the room at the adults who held the power to shape his and his peers' educational future. I think, he said slowly, we should invite her in. If we're going to change things, we need to understand how they got this way in the first place. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their potential impact. In that moment, it became clear to everyone present that they were standing at a turning point, not just for Evergreen Academy, but potentially for educational institutions across the nation. Principal Winters nodded solemnly. Jamal, your wisdom surpasses your years. Let's invite Ms. Hawthorne in. It's time we all face this together. As Sarah left to bring Victoria in, the atmosphere in the room shifted. What had started as a crisis meeting was transforming into something much more profound. The beginning of real, systemic change. In the weeks following the incident, Evergreen Academy became the epicenter of a national conversation about systemic racism and educational reform. The story of Jamal and his family's response catalyzed changes that no one could have predicted. Victoria Hawthorne, removed from her teaching position, faced not only an administrative process, but also a criminal investigation for discrimination and psychological abuse. Her once brilliant career now served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of institutionalized prejudice. Marcus Washington, utilizing his influence and resources, established the New Horizons Foundation, dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in elite schools across the country. The Foundation's first project was creating a scholarship program for students from marginalized communities, with Jamal as the youth ambassador. Tanya, inspired by the events, decided to return to university to specialize in educational psychology, determined to help children who had gone through traumatic experiences similar to her son's. At Evergreen Academy, changes were swift and profound. Sarah Rodriguez, after publicly disclosing her confession about years of omission, was surprisingly retained in her position, now leading an ethics and inclusion committee. Her experience became valuable in identifying and correcting subtle discriminatory practices. Emma saw her student rights group grow exponentially. With the support of the new administration, they implemented a system of inclusion monitors in each class, trained to identify and report biased behaviors. Mr. Thompson, the janitor, emerged as a respected figure in the school community. His long experience and silent observations became crucial in rebuilding the institutional culture. He was promoted to a new position, School Community Relations Advisor. The impact extended far beyond the school walls. The Department of Education, pressured by public opinion, launched a task force to review inclusion policies in private schools across the country. Jamal's case became a mandatory study in teacher training courses. On social media, the hashtag #SaMoreThanANumber, inspired by Jamal's story, became a movement. Students from all over the United States began sharing their own experiences with discrimination, creating a wave of awareness and solidarity. Jamal, initially reluctant with the attention, found his voice as a youth spokesperson against bullying and discrimination. His talks at other schools inspired students to stand up against injustices. However, not everything was smooth sailing. Victoria, even after her public apology, still had supporters who argued that she was being unfairly demonized. Some conservative parents threatened to withdraw their children from the school, claiming that the new inclusion policies would compromise the quality of education. Marcus and Tanya, despite their past differences, formed an unexpected partnership. Together, they gave interviews and participated in debates, using their contrasting experiences to illustrate how prejudice affects families across all social classes. The educational industry as a whole began to move. Publishers rushed to update textbooks, including representation and discussions about diversity. Educational technology companies developed tools to monitor and prevent discriminatory behaviors in virtual learning environments. Meanwhile, at the heart of it all, Jamal continued his journey of healing and growth. Therapy sessions helped him process the trauma, and he discovered in writing a powerful way to express his feelings and experiences. One sunny afternoon, almost a year after the original incident, Jamal was sitting on the school steps observing his peers. Emma joined him, smiling. "Have you ever thought about where we'd be if that snake had never appeared?" she asked. Jamal reflected for a moment. "You know, sometimes I think that snake was the best and worst thing that could have happened. It was scary, it was unfair, but look at what we managed to do because of it." As they talked, they saw Victoria leaving the school after a restorative justice session. She waved at them, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning. Jamal and Emma waved back. "We still have a lot of work ahead," Jamal said, "but for the first time, I feel like we can really change things." The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the school. For Jamal, it was a reminder. Even in the darkest moments, there's always the possibility of light, of change, of a new dawn. 6 months after the incident, Jamal found himself at a personal crossroads. The trauma of the experience with Victoria still reverberated in his mind, but each day brought with it a new opportunity for growth and overcoming. In therapy sessions, Jamal began to explore not just the event itself, but also the complexities of his identity. "Sometimes I feel divided," he confessed to his therapist, Dr. Lisa Chen. "Between my dad's world and my mom's. Between being the snake boy and just myself." Dr. Chen encouraged him to use writing as a form of expression. Jamal started a journal where his words flowed freely, without fear of judgment. In one particularly powerful entry he wrote, "The snake doesn't define me. It transformed me, but it doesn't limit me." At school, the changes were visible. The Inclusion Monitor program, initiated by Emma, had created a more welcoming environment. Jamal, initially hesitant to participate, found the courage to join the group. "Your voice matters," Emma constantly reminded him. On a sunny afternoon, during a meeting of the Student Diversity Council, Jamal surprised everyone by proposing a bold idea: a cultural festival celebrating the school's diversity. "We can show that our differences make us stronger," he argued, his voice gaining confidence with each word. Jamal's proposal was met with enthusiasm. Principal Winters saw in it an opportunity for collective healing. "Let's turn this event into a milestone of our new identity," she declared, her eyes shining with renewed determination. As preparations for the festival progressed, Jamal faced his own challenges. In a biology class, when the teacher mentioned reptiles, Jamal felt his heart race. But instead of retreating, he took a deep breath and raised his hand. "Mr. Johnson, can I share my experience?" he asked, surprising himself and his classmates. At that moment, speaking openly about the incident and how it affected him, Jamal felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. His classmates listened attentively, many of them seeing him in a new light. At home, the family dynamic was also evolving. Marcus and Tanya, inspired by their son's resilience, worked on their own issues. At a family dinner, Marcus surprised everyone by saying, "Jamal, you've taught us more about courage and integrity than any business success could." Tanya, with tears in her eyes, added, "Son, seeing you get up every day, facing your fears, gives me strength to face my own challenges." As the day of the festival approached, Jamal found himself assuming a leadership role he never imagined possible. He coordinated presentations, mediated discussions about diversity, and even helped create an art exhibition focused on overcoming adversity. On the eve of the event, Jamal had a moment of doubt. Sitting in his room, he looked at the festival poster he had designed. "What if it's not enough?" he murmured to himself. It was then that he noticed a message on his phone. It was from Mr. Thompson. "Jamal, remember when you were afraid to even walk past the science room? Look where you are now. I'm proud of you, kid." Those simple words rekindled Jamal's determination. On the day of the festival, he took the stage to give the opening speech. His voice, once timid, now resonated with confidence. "6 months ago, I was the boy who trembled at the sight of a snake. Today, I stand here not because I've completely overcome my fears, but because I've learned that I can be stronger than them." This festival isn't just about celebrating our differences. It's about recognizing that each of us has a story of overcoming to tell. As Jamal spoke, faces in the audience lit up with recognition and empathy. Parents, teachers, and students, many with tears in their eyes, saw themselves reflected in his words. Victoria Hawthorne, who had been invited as part of the school's restorative justice program, sat in the back, listening intently. Her eyes, once cold and judgmental, now held a mix of remorse and admiration. After the speech, Victoria approached Jamal, her steps hesitant. "Jamal," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know my words can never undo what I did, but I want you to know that you've taught me more than I ever taught in my entire career." Jamal looked at her, a complexity of emotions crossing his face. After a moment, he extended his hand. "Ms. Hawthorne, thank you for being here. Your presence shows that change is possible, even when it seems impossible." As they shook hands, a ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. It was a powerful moment of reconciliation, symbolizing the journey the entire school community had undergone. At that moment, Jamal realized that his journey of overcoming was not solitary. Every person there had their own snakes to face, and together they were creating a space where fear gave way to understanding, and prejudice to acceptance. As the festival continued around him, Jamal was no longer just the snake boy. He was a symbol of resilience, a catalyst for change, and above all, a young man discovering the power of his own voice. The cultural festival at Evergreen Academy was in full swing, transforming the school into a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and experiences. At the center of it all, Jamal moved with newfound confidence, coordinating activities and ensuring that the message of inclusion and diversity permeated every aspect of the event. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, a subtle tension began to form behind the scenes. Principal Winters received a call that left her visibly disturbed. She pulled Marcus and Tanya aside to a quiet corner. "Victoria is here," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "She's demanding to speak with Jamal, says she wants to apologize publicly." Marcus clenched his fists, his expression hardening. "Absolutely not. She has no right to—" Tanya interrupted him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait, maybe this is necessary. For Jamal, for all of us." While the adults debated, Jamal, unaware of the situation, was about to go on stage for the festival's closing ceremony. Emma ran up to him, breathless. "Jamal, you won't believe it. Victoria is here." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. Memories of the snake incident flooded his mind, threatening to shake his newly acquired confidence. But then he remembered the words he had written in his journal. "The snake doesn't define me." Taking a deep breath, Jamal made a decision. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady. On the other side of the courtyard, Victoria Hawthorne stood, a shadow of her former authoritarian persona. Her eyes, once full of disdain, now carried a weight of remorse and shame. Jamal approached her, followed closely by his parents and Principal Winters. The festival's buzz seemed to diminish, as if the entire school held its collective breath. "Jamal," Victoria began, her voice almost unrecognizable in its humility. "I came to—" But before she could continue, the sound of breaking glass interrupted the moment. A group of former students, still resentful of the school's past practices, had crashed the event. Protest signs were raised and shouts of "No more racism" echoed across the courtyard. Chaos quickly ensued. Parents pulled their children close, teachers tried to calm the situation, and security guards rushed to contain the protesters. In the midst of the confusion, Jamal saw Victoria, pale and trembling, being pushed by the agitated crowd. In a split second, Jamal had to make a choice. He could let events unfold, watching Victoria face the fury she had sown over the years. Or he could act, demonstrating in practice the principles of empathy and forgiveness that the festival was meant to celebrate. With his heart racing, Jamal extended his hand to Victoria. "Come with me," he said, guiding her away from the tumult. Marcus and Tanya watched, astonished, as their son led his former tormentor to safety. Emma, seeing the scene, ran to the sound system. "Attention everyone!" Her voice echoed through the speakers. Please remain calm. Remember why we're here today. We can't fight intolerance with more intolerance. Her words seemed to have a calming effect on the crowd. Slowly, the shouts diminished, replaced by a murmur of confusion and curiosity. Jamal, still holding Victoria's arm, climbed onto the stage. The silence that followed was palpable, charged with expectation and tension. Looking at the crowd, then at Victoria and finally at his parents, Jamal realized that this was the moment for which his entire journey had prepared him. What he would say now would not only define the outcome of the festival, but also the future of the movement he had inadvertently started. Principal Winters approached the stage, microphone in hand. She looked at Jamal, a question in her eyes. Jamal nodded, taking the microphone. The entire school watched in anticipation. Reporters who had come to cover the festival now turned their cameras to the stage, sensing a pivotal moment. Jamal took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the diverse faces in the crowd. He saw fear, anger, confusion, and hope. In that moment he understood that his words could either heal or deepen the wounds of the past. With a steadying breath, Jamal began to speak, ready to face his greatest challenge yet. The silence was deafening as Jamal positioned himself in front of the microphone, with Victoria standing beside him, visibly shaken. The crowd, a mix of confused, angry, and expectant faces, awaited his words. Jamal closed his eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, and began. A few months ago, I was in a classroom, paralyzed with fear in front of a snake. Today, I'm here, in front of all of you, facing a much greater fear, the fear of not rising to the occasion. His voice, initially trembling, gained strength as he continued. Look around us. This festival was born from an act of cruelty, but it has transformed into a celebration of diversity and unity. We're here to show that we can be better, that we can overcome our prejudices and fears. He paused, looking directly at Victoria. Ms. Hawthorne made a terrible mistake, a mistake that hurt me deeply and exposed a much larger problem in our society. But if we continue the cycle of hatred and vengeance, what example are we setting? Murmurs began to rise from the crowd. Jamal could see his parents, Marcus and Tanya, looking at him with a mixture of pride and apprehension. I chose to forgive, Jamal declared, his voice now firm and clear. Not because what happened was right, but because forgiveness liberates us. It allows us to grow and change. Victoria, with tears in her eyes, took a step forward. Jamal nodded, allowing her to speak. I don't deserve Jamal's forgiveness, she began, her voice choked with emotion. What I did was unforgivable. I've spent months reflecting on my actions, on the years of prejudice that I nurtured and perpetuated. I'm here not to ask you to forget, but to commit to doing better, to being better. The tension in the air was palpable. Some in the crowd seemed skeptical, others moved. Jamal took the microphone again. Change isn't easy. Believe me, I know. Every day since that incident has been a struggle. But look at what we've managed to accomplish together. He gestured to the festival around them. This is just the beginning. At this moment, Emma joined Jamal on stage. She took the microphone. Jamal is right. What we're doing here is revolutionary. We're showing that it's possible to transform pain into purpose, fear into courage. Marcus and Tanya, moved by the scene, also approached the stage. Marcus spoke. As a father, my instinct was to protect my son at all costs. But Jamal taught me a valuable lesson about compassion and true strength. Tanya added, this school, this community, all of us are on a journey of learning and growth. What Jamal and his classmates are doing here is the true meaning of education. The atmosphere began to shift. What was once tension now transformed into an energy of unity and shared purpose. Jamal, feeling the change, took the final step. I propose that we transform this moment into something bigger. Let Evergreen Academy become a model of inclusive and conscious education. Let's create anti-prejudice training programs for teachers, scholarships to promote diversity, and make this festival an annual event to celebrate our progress and remember where we came from." The crowd erupted in applause. Tears were visible on many faces. Victoria, still on stage next to Jamal, seemed transformed, a mixture of remorse and determination in her eyes. Principal Winters quickly took the stage with a document in her hands. "Jamal, your proposal is more than welcome. In fact, inspired by your courage, the school board has already approved an action plan to implement significant changes in our institution, and we would like you, Emma, and other students to lead this process." The courtyard exploded in a standing ovation. What began as a moment of potential conflict had transformed into a historic turning point for the school and potentially for the educational system as a whole. Jamal, surrounded by his parents, friends, and even Victoria, who was now openly crying, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had not only overcome his trauma, but transformed it into a catalyst for positive change. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the scene, it became clear to all present that this was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new era of understanding, acceptance, and collective growth. Victoria approached Jamal one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Jamal. You've shown me what true education looks like." Jamal smiled, a smile that carried the wisdom of his experiences. "We're all learning, Ms. Hawthorne. That's what matters." As the festival continued around them, with music, laughter, and conversations filling the air, Jamal knew that the story of the snake had become more than just a personal trauma. It had become a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even from the darkest moments, light can emerge. In the weeks following the festival, Evergreen Academy became a symbol of educational transformation across the United States. Jamal's story, now known nationwide, inspired schools throughout the country to rethink their practices and policies. The action plan proposed by Jamal and approved by the school board quickly took shape. A diversity and inclusion committee was established with representatives from students, parents, teachers, and education experts. Jamal and Emma were at the forefront, their young voices bringing fresh and innovative perspectives. Victoria Hawthorne, determined to redeem herself, offered to work with the committee. Her experience, though born from past mistakes, proved valuable in identifying problematic practices rooted in the system. She initiated a re-education program for teachers, focusing on awareness of unconscious biases and inclusive practices in the classroom. Marcus Washington, using his influence in the corporate world, established partnerships with companies to create mentorship and internship programs for students from underrepresented groups. This not only opened doors for students, but also began to change the private sector's mindset about diversity. Tanya, inspired by her son's journey, returned to university to specialize in educational psychology, focusing on trauma and resilience in school environments. Her work began to influence emotional support policies in schools across the state. The impact extended beyond the school walls. The Department of Education, recognizing the potential of Evergreen Academy's model, initiated a pilot program to implement similar practices in public schools across the country. Jamal, now in his final year of middle school, found himself as a respected leader among his peers. His personal story of overcoming and forgiveness became a case study in ethics and citizenship classes. The Diversity Festival became an annual event, attracting participants from other schools and even from other states. Each year, the event grew, becoming a platform for young activists, progressive educators, and community leaders to share ideas and experiences. On a sunny afternoon, almost a year after the original incident, Jamal sat on the school steps, observing his classmates. Emma joined him, smiling. "Have you ever thought about where we'd be if that snake had never appeared?" she asked. Jamal reflected for a moment. "You know, Sometimes I think that snake was the best and worst thing that could have happened. It was scary. It was unfair. But look at what we managed to do because of it." As they talked, they saw Victoria leaving the school after a training session. She waved at them, a simple gesture but loaded with meaning. Jamal and Emma waved back. "We still have a lot of work ahead," Jamal said. "But for the first time, I feel like we can really change things." The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the school. For Jamal, it was a reminder. Even in the darkest moments, there's always the possibility of light, of change, of a new dawn. What had started as a terrifying encounter with a snake had become the catalyst for a movement that was reshaping education and touching lives far beyond the walls of Evergreen Academy. As Jamal stood up, ready to head home, he knew that his journey was far from over. But now, instead of fear, he felt hope. Hope for himself, for his school, and for a future where every student could feel valued and empowered. 5 years later, Jamal Washington, now 18, climbed the steps of Harvard University. His admission, a result of hard work and the inclusion program he helped create, marked not just a personal achievement, but a symbol of systemic change. In his backpack, he carried a recently published book, From Snake to Transformation, a journey of educational change, co-written by him and Victoria Hawthorne. As he walked across the campus, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Emma. Guess what? The Evergreen model is being implemented nationwide. Dear viewer, if you've watched this far, your journey with Jamal is almost complete. But remember, each of us has the power to be an agent of change in our communities. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it, discuss it, and most importantly, act on it. Whether in your school, workplace, or neighborhood, small acts of inclusion and understanding can create waves of transformation. Don't forget to comment, "I watched until the end," to show us you're committed to this change. And don't miss the next video. Click on the end screen to continue exploring stories that inspire and educate. Together, we can make a difference.